Hello, you're watching the Great Canadian Bagel here, and today we have another Canadian federal election forecast update. But before I begin, I just would like to announce that following the release of this video, I will be going on a 3-week hiatus. I am getting married, and I do not plan on making videos before, during, or after. On the 29th, I should be coming back with another video. I haven't decided what yet. That's 4 weeks from now. But, well. Oh, and once again, I'd like to shout out all my channel members. Really appreciate you guys and everything you guys do for the channel. If you want to support the channel, join down the link in the description, or do your regular YouTube things. Like, share, subscribe, comment below. I understand all those things. So, no further ado, let us begin. So, a lot of stuff has happened, and at the time of recording this, there is a lot of questions on if Trudeau is going to resign because of the Toronto-St. Paul by-election. And I will be talking about that, but I'm going to cover over everything first. The seat changes, the regionalityness. So what we're starting to see here, region by region across the country, is they're all settling into a groove. BC, we're seeing coastal, the interior, Fraser Valley, and then all around the metro going conservative. Some seats like Kingsway or Quandra are close. They could go either way. But then you have things like North BC or North Vancouver, which are pretty safe now for the Conservatives. I wouldn't call them safe in the grand scheme of things, but they should be flips at this stage. Across the prairies, Saskatchewan, Alberta, nothing really much has changed. Winnipeg, we're starting to see some inklings movement here, in Manitoba. In Winnipeg specifically, we're starting to see some movements. The rest of Manitoba is pretty stationary. St. Boniface, St. Vital is currently slated to flip. Winnipeg South is pretty close. Elmwood, Transcona is pretty close. And personally, we are having a by-election for Elmwood's Transcona. I actually expect Transcona to flip Conservative. Whether it will stay that way come the election, I'm not 100% sure yet. But I think it will flip just because I think the Conservatives are going to dump a lot of effort into winning that race. For the sign that will show. They can flip what is previously considered a safe NDP seat. And there's also considerations, is it safe NDP or is it safe Blakey seat? Daniel Blakey being the former MP before he resigned. Going into Ontario, we're in a situation now where the entire province, except Ottawa and Toronto, is going Conservative. We just have tiny holdouts like Windsor West and Hamilton Centre. And even in Toronto, we're seeing quite strong performances of the Conservatives. We have much of Mississauga, Etobicoke, even Brampton. And for those of you who are aware, just this last week, on June 24th, we had the Toronto-St. Paul by-election, and the seat was flipped. The Conservatives won Toronto-St. Paul. So we're going to zoom in here for a second so we can see it easier. This is Toronto-St. Paul, right down here. That seat was flipped by the Conservatives. Now, my model, I don't have them flipping it because I don't actually expect the flip to happen. I think the Liberals were a bit stupefied by the flip. I don't think they were expecting it. So come an actual election, with the current numbers and the current federal levels and all that stuff, I think the Liberals are going to put a lot of effort to win back St. Paul's. And you'll probably see a lot of turnout occur that didn't turn out because I thought it was going to be like a slam dunk. So I do expect this to be a return flip. But the fact that it was flipped right now, when the Liberals have like a 3-point lead there by my modeling, is pretty substantial. And then you start seeing much of other parts of Toronto, and the GTA in general, it's very possible that much of the outskirts, like uh, Scarborough Agincourt here, maybe I don't recall which one Scarborough Riding's which, but you could see most of the outskirts of Toronto that are not, roughly speaking, this eastern block here, all go conservative, and Spadina, Fort York, that could go conservative too. Ottawa, Orleans, and I think this is Ottawa South. Those could flip potentially if momentum continues, though I don't really expect it, though it is possible. And then in Quebec, we're starting to see the Bloc consolidate rural Quebec vote, and they're starting to break into Montreal with Hochla Rose Petite Rosemont. I think that's the name of this riding. Maybe I'm confusing with the NDP riding. There's too many ridings. I can't remember every single one of them properly. Apologies to any Quebecers here, but they're flipping Hochla here. They're making inroads into Laval, flipping Quebec Center, and they could very well win Lightbun's seat. I can't think of the name of it, but this one here. Saint Hubert, maybe? Is the name of the seat? Anyways, the Bloc are starting to do quite well in Quebec, and then you finally have the Maritimes. Or Atlantic Canada, I should say, because Maritimes technically is only Nova Scotia, New Brunswick, and PEI, but anyways, Atlantic Canada. And we're seeing basically all of PEI. Charlottetown's just barely holding on for the Liberals here. Moncton and Beausejour, I think it's to pronounce that. Correct me in the comments below if I'm pronouncing Beausejour wrong. Are not super safe, but they're not unsafe for the Liberals. Same thing with Halifax and Halifax West. And same thing with St. John's. They're close, and I suspect if things continue, if trends continue, they might actually be competitive and flippable. But for now, there's some breathing room. Overall, we're not looking at very good numbers for the Liberals, and very solid numbers for the Conservatives. They're 221, which would put them at the highest raw seats ever won, but not the highest percentage. Highest percentage, I think, would require like 270. And that would put them on the level of Diefenbaker. And then if we just see trends going on here, we look at June 3rd to July 1st, when this is calibration or projections calibrated to, the Conservatives are about 0.6, the Liberals are down about 0.8 or 0.9, NDP's flat, Green's up a little bit, Bloc's up 0.4, everyone else is, or PPC's flat, and others down 0.2. And what we're really seeing here is, once again, what I've remarked in the past, is we're not seeing the Conservatives gain ground in one province or two provinces. They're gaining ground pretty much uniformly across Canada. They're up in Newfoundland, up in PEI, up in Nova Scotia, up in New Brunswick, up in Quebec, up in Ontario, up in Manitoba. Actually, they're down in Manitoba, sorry. They're up in Saskatchewan, they're up in Alberta, they're up in BC, they're up in the territories. It's just Manitoba they're down, and it's within margin of error. There. And that's remarkable. But that's not that remarkable. Now, there's some inklings you'll see people talk about, such as in the US elections, or say Alberta 2023, where they'll be like, Danielle Smith only won by 5,000 votes or something like that, if you count up the 5 closest ridings. But that's not how this works. There's no world, in general, unless you are really good at exploiting data statistics and early voting and your opponent is really bad at it, that you suddenly get specifically, or you suddenly flip a few ridings. If you want to, in the case of, say, Canada here, Poilievre's not going to just magically flip Halifax West. That's not going to magically happen. If he's doing something like that to flip, say, Halifax West, it's because he's doing better across the country. in the case of Alberta, we don't see we wouldn't see Nenshi in 27 coming in and just magically winning by flipping 5 seats. He's going to actually gain many percentage points of vote across the entire province to do that. Because you can't actually directly target voters that closely. If your message is good enough to flip those voters, those 5,000 you did in Calgary, you're also going to be flipping thousands and thousands across the entire province. Because voters are similar to each other. The groups that you're losing in Calgary for the Alberta NDP are the same people you're losing in other parts of the province. So if you flip them, you're going to flip these other people. There's not really a situation where you can micro-target that accurately. Now, don't get me wrong. Data statistics and using early voting accurately and properly can let you win elections quite handily. But that's not because you are suddenly convincing more people than would otherwise vote for you. You're not changing any minds with that. The point of early voting, statistics, voter identification isn't to change minds. It's to know who's already agreeing with you so you can go to their door and take them to the polling booth. Now, there's limitations to this. There's only so many days you can early vote. There's only so much volunteers and money you have for funding this. And there's only so much data you can collect before and during an election to do this. But you only have so much room. So you're going to see this kind of general trend across the board. You rise across the board or you sink across the board. It's not really you're cratering in one region or shooting up in another. You might see one region crater and another one really blow up, but it's not usually that bad. Like if I just hide a bunch of these, so we can look at the last. Well, let's hide it till January, so we can go from January till today, so we can get an easy comparison here. Now look, the Conservatives are up 2.4, and the Liberals are down 2.1. Pretty similar. Those are related numbers, obviously. And you look across the board, then the Conservatives are gained ground everywhere. They've gained less in Saskatchewan. They've gained less in Manitoba. They've gained less in Alberta than, say, BC, then, say, Atlantic, then, say, the Territories. But it's going to be up everywhere, given a long enough spectrum of time. If you're gaining 2 percentage points across the country, you're going to gain, on average, around 2 percentage points in each province. Some will be a little lower, some will be a little higher, but obviously that average has to work out, and it's going to be affecting everyone because there's people who will resonate with the message everywhere. So why am I talking about this when everyone really wants to hear about the by-election, or they want to hear about whether Trudeau is going to resign? Well, this really matters to that topic. This isn't just an indulgent prelude. There is actually a point to that. So, as I've just established here, you rise and fall uniformly. There's not, I'm suddenly gaining a huge amount of ground here, or I'm suddenly losing a huge amount of ground there. If your message resonates, it's going to resonate across the board. You can do specific targeting to really help in specific areas, but generally speaking, that's going to be really niche. Going to rise and fall across the board usually. So how does this interface with Trudeau? How does it interface with the by-election in Toronto St. Paul's? Well, the Liberals obviously lost Toronto St. Paul's, and they didn't even lose it by a narrow margin. Yeah, you could argue 1.6% is pretty narrow. This was a riding. Bennett won by 25 points in 2021. We're looking at a roughly a 27% swing there. That's a big deal. Okay. How does it play in, though? Well, that tells you one of two things. Hypothesis one is this is a fluke, and that was a Carolyn Bennett writing. So it wasn't actually that safe. It was just she was really popular there. And it's an okay explanation, though it's a bit dubious. Because even in the past, every time the Conservatives have won St. Paul's federally, they've usually done quite well in the election, but in Ontario at least. The other hypothesis, though, is that the Liberals are even further down than a lot of people think they are. And if that's true in St. Paul's, that suggests it's true across the board. Because right now, what my model says is we have a 16-point spread. And if TSP, and if we're saying that Toronto St. Paul, I don't know why I use the acronym. If we're saying Toronto St. Paul's has a 25-point swing to round a bit, well, my model's suggesting that the election's a lot closer than this by-election suggests. Now, there's lots of mechanics to play, and you shouldn't extrapolate from one by-election to across the entire thing. And I am working on some details about doing a projection using just by-elections, though we have 3 more coming up in the near future, so I'm going to wait for that till after those by-elections come through for just bulking up the data a little bit. Particularly the one in Montreal in LaSalle, Amard, Verdun is the interesting one to me, but I digress. But if you have this 25-point swing in St. Paul's, and you rise and fall, roughly speaking, uniformly everywhere, we really do expect that much of the country is much worse than this suggests. We should be seeing actually lots of Montreal be quite competitive. We're looking at the Liberals losing quite about this much support, and the Conservatives gaining this much support. Most of Atlantic's going to be gone. Probably not going to see Halifax's or St. John's if this St. Paul election generalizes. And this is where you come into with replacing leaders. And this is the trick and the difficulty the Liberals have. Are the Liberals losing right now because of Trudeau or because of the Liberal Party, their policies, their goals? Or there's a third hypothesis that I mostly see Liberal partisans propose this, which is just global trends are against incumbents. So I'll just address the third one first. If that hypothesis is true, then replacing the leader doesn't matter. It doesn't. If the Liberals are losing for factors that are outside of the Liberals' control, replacing a leader doesn't do anything. There's no point in replacing him. Slapping David Lametti or Chrystia Freeland or Anita Anand or Mark Carney or whoever else you want to throw the name in the hat into the Prime Minister's office when the Liberals are losing because of external factors doesn't do anything. Nothing has changed. You're not losing because of your own actions. So changing the person making the actions doesn't do anything. It's actually a very defeatist mentality, and I reject that actually anyone serious uses this. Because anyone suggesting that it's just external factors is throwing in the towel. It's complete defeatism, that they can't win, it's out of their control. It's a very depressing philosophy to have right now. If it's, to skip number 2 for a moment, if it's option 1, and it's Trudeau himself, that Trudeau's his brand has gotten too worn out, or he's seen as too mean, or too divisive, or whatever you want to call it, if that's what people are seeing it as, and that's why the Liberals are losing, replacing him could work. We have seen this before. Replacing O'Toole with Poilievre worked. It made the Conservatives much better. I don't think any serious person thinks that O'Toole would be 16 points ahead right now. You could argue that he might be doing in the high 30s or something like that, but he's not going to be in the same position that Poilievre is because he's objectively a different person. Different leader, different policies, different goals, different personality. He wouldn't be in the same position. And I would contend he'd probably be in a much worse position. Another example is Danielle Smith replacing Jason Kenney. Kenney was widely detested for a lot of stuff he did during COVID, which is a very similar analogy to Trudeau right now. And the UCP replaced him with Danielle Smith, who spoke out against policies that Kenney had and wanted to change policies from what Kenney did and do different things. But then you have other examples that are negative examples where it didn't work. When the UK Tories replaced Boris Johnson with eventually Rishi Sunak, nothing changed. They're floundered. They're still floundering. Because the reason why the Tories were falling apart was not addressed by Sunak. Sunak didn't change anything. Then you have another possible example. You have in Nova Scotia. You have in Nova Scotia, where Ian Rankin lost the 2021 Nova Scotian election and was replaced by Zach Churchill. Zach Churchill has had zero success. In fact, if you are a Nova Scotian watching this, you might be one of the only people in the province to know who Zach Churchill is and that he is the leader of the Liberal Party. And you might not have even known that until I just said it. I know people who don't know who he is at all, like zero name ID. And needless to say, the Nova Scotia Liberal Party is doing terrible right now. They're distant third place. And they're at risk of losing pretty much all of their seats because there's just nothing there for people to grasp onto. Or another negative example is replacing the Manitoba PC's leader, Brian Pallister, with Heather Stephenson. Pallister, similar to Kenney, was pretty detested because of a lot of COVID things and policies he has acted in government, and his own party wasn't very happy with him. And then they replaced him with a boring, generic, uninspiring candidate, Heather Stephenson. And they basically did the exact same thing. There was very little change in the polls between those two people becoming leaders because there wasn't really anything different about them. There was really very little to change people's opinions. In fact, I'll actually just bring over the polls on that one because it's a very good case study. So you look at the polls here in 2021, 36 to 39 is the range we're seeing here. Then Stephenson's elected, and then we're seeing 37 to 35. Or you could say maybe 39 to 35 is the range, which is basically the same thing it was before. Nothing changed. It's approximately the same. And you look at every other one of these examples, most of the time, nothing changed. Replacing the leader doesn't actually seem to be a surefire way to change anything. There are at least examples where it works, but not always. So to me, that means hypothesis 1 is not a good one. I don't think the Liberals are losing because of Trudeau. To say that would to suggest that Canadians like all of the policies he's doing, they like what his government is doing, they just detest the man. And usually speaking, that's not how politics works. The way polarization works and partisanship works is if you identify with one party's policies, you will start identifying with their other policies. You will identify with their leaders. You'll identify with their leadership. You will like those people. There's a reason why you can have two friends who otherwise agree, but one might like the Liberal Party and might think, Trudeau's not a bad guy, and one guy might be like the Conservative Party and might be like, Poilievre's not is a good guy, but they don't like the other guy. These two people are friends. They're very similar people. But because of this one political polarization moment, they have a very distinct view on these politicians. That's normal. And I'll just put an emphasis here. Don't just stop being friends with someone because of their political preferences. That's crazy. So I don't think you actually see leadership as the be-all, end-all. It's important because in the sense that how the leader acts and what they do does matter. Changing Trudeau for someone who's Trudeau but better might help them win a few seats. Might increase their vote percentage a few points. But the Liberal Party doesn't want that. They don't want a little bit better, save a few seats, get a few percentage points more. That's not a thing they want, right? When you're talking about replacing your leader, when you're talking about doing a coup, you're not looking for the current guy, but 5% better. You're looking at a revolution. You want something completely different. You want to change the status quo. But the only options oftentimes are just the leader but different. And if you have just the leader but slightly different, you're not going to get dramatically different results. Again, look at Zach Churchill versus Ian Rankin, Brian Pallister versus Heather Stephenson, Horgan versus David Eby. I could go on. Replacing the leader doesn't necessarily change anything. It could have. It can. But it's not necessary. The way you can tell when a leader change does something is when the leader comes in to do something. A good example of this is Keir Starmer came in and he changed something about Labour. It's one of the reasons that Labour is doing so well here in the British election. It's not just because Sunak and the Tories are doing bad. There is a proactive element here. And that proactive element is Starmer chased away the toxic elements of the Labour brand. They chased away people like Jeremy Corbyn. They straight up kicked him out of the party. And that was one of the things that was holding back Labour. Starmer came in and did a massive change to the Labour Party by doing this. Poilievre came into the Conservative Party run by O'Toole and did a very big change. He changed a lot of O'Toole's policies. O'Toole supported a weird O'Toole bucks instead of the carbon tax. Poilievre wants to get rid of the carbon tax. Completely. Gone. You can say more and more policies too, but that's the easiest and cleanest difference. Poilievre just completely got rid of everything O'Toole did. He even got rid of O'Toole's logo change to do a different logo. So that might seem petty to some people, but it's complete excise of that kind of philosophy, that kind of energy that O'Toole brought to the party. Changed everything about it. So what does this apply to the three hypotheses? Well, I think the second hypothesis is the correct one. The Liberals aren't losing because of Trudeau. They're losing because the party is pursuing policies and doing actions that the average Canadian no longer wants to see done. That might seem amazingly obvious, but I think a lot of people A lot of partisans, a lot of commentators don't like saying that because it, in a way, it almost gives too much agency to voters. And a lot of times I don't think people like giving too much agency to voters. But in the end, it really boils down to that the voters want something different. The Liberals are not losing right now. The NDP is not doing terrible right now because Singh and Trudeau are bad leaders. And Singh and Trudeau are not bad leaders because they're bad people, or because they're weak, or because they're spineless, or because they're quote-unquote bad people. They're bad leaders for their parties. And their parties are doing badly because they're pursuing policies that do not meet the requirements and the goals of Canadians. That's why they're doing so poorly. That's why you're seeing a combined Liberal NDP party, if you merged their votes together, which, as we've touched on in the past, is not a thing that exists. It's not a thing you can do. But if you merge those two right now, they're competitive neck and neck with the Conservative Party in raw vote total. That's rare. That almost never happens. The last time that would have happened would have been under Mulroney, with a completely unrelated Conservative Party. The PCs were qualitatively different. What we're seeing now is the general inkling of change in Canadians. They want something different. For now, they're grasping onto Poilievre's liberal conservative agenda. When I say liberal conservative, you should watch my video, What is Conservatism? That is an actual term I have defined on this channel. But Poilievre is a liberal conservative. And they're latching on to that style of policy, that style of leadership, because people don't seem to want liberalism anymore. You start looking at a lot of these policies, some of these key liberal policies. Carbon tax is unpopular. Immigration is unpopular. Deficit spending is unpopular. And crazy enough, austerity is popular. That's not necessarily a conservative thing. That's just a thing that I've noticed in polls. People like austerity more. A lot of social conservative issues across the board, such as, say, like abortion, or even some wild ones that you won't even expect to go, because not even the US is talking about stuff like this, but like support for divorce as morally... The people reporting that divorce is morally okay is declining rapidly. That contraceptives are morally okay is declining rapidly. What does this mean? Does it mean the Conservatives are going to legislate those things? Obviously not. The Conservatives are not have enough people in the party who would want to do that for that to even happen. Just crazy to think that. But what that does mean, what that does show, is that Canadians are rapidly changing their opinions on these things. They're looking for something different. Will it stay like this? I can't tell you that. Will this trend continue? I can't tell you that either. I think it will, but that's just a guess. And the reason I think it will is because I think overall, what we're seeing, based on all the polls I see, all the data I look at, the people I talk to, the modeling I do, the by-election results that occur, even how the media acts, people are tired of liberalism. They want something more. You can look into just the itty-gritty details of some of these polls. That doesn't even necessarily seem politics related. You'll see polls where young people report that they're more lonely than ever. They're more isolated than ever. They're more depressed than ever. Why do you think that is? I can't tell you. But the way you answer it in your mind right now will tell you a lot. If you think people are more depressed than ever because the world sucks, that's one thought process. Possibly more aligned with a lot of liberals. If your thought process is people are depressed right now and lonely because the status quo of modernity is failing people, then you are looking at the more conservative worldview. Does that mean you have a revolution and change everything? No. You can't do that. There is no undoing what has been done. You cannot unrot what has been struck. You can only evolve past it to a safer, better position. That is the conservative thought process. That is the things that Poilievre or other conservative leaders across the world are saying. We can't undo the bad things. They've already happened. But we can do things to rectify that now. And that message is resonating with people. You're seeing it across the board. Will it work once he's in government? Will he follow through and this will lead to a conservative renaissance in Canada? It depends. It really does. Does he actually succeed? If he doesn't succeed, you'll see people keep searching. We're not in a situation where voters are going to lock in and pick liberal conservatism as the next thing they're going to rest on for the next 40 years, 80 years. They're going to find the thing that works, that addresses their issues, that satisfies their concerns. And if that issue turns out to be conservatism, they'll do that. Or if what you're seeing in Europe, where it doesn't work, because the liberal conservative parties in Europe, like Les Républicains or like the CDU, just don't do what they want, and they'll keep looking. And then you start seeing parties like the Reform Party, which are more national conservative, coming through. And maybe you'll see other things too if Reform fails. Who knows? There's about infinity ideologies you can name. This is just more. You could create your own right now. It's not very hard. Making one that's coherent and other people like, that's harder, but just making an ideology is pretty easy. Just pick random policies and call it something. There you go. You succeeded. You made an ideology. Might not make any sense, but you did it. You made one. And that's where we are right now. I don't think the Liberals could replace Trudeau with anyone. There's not a single Liberal... Sorry, let me phrase this. There's not a single person who could win the Liberal leadership race who would manifestly change circumstances. At best, maybe a few percentage points higher for the Liberals. At worst, a few percentage points lower. But we're not talking about much. Because at the end of the day, the issue isn't Trudeau. The issue isn't that they lost St. Paul's. The issue isn't that their policies are good or bad. The issue isn't that the world is good or bad. The issue boils down to Canadians want something, and the Liberals cannot give it to them. And the Liberals can only not give it to them because the Liberals choose not to. It's not a law defined unto man that Liberals cannot, say, curtail immigration. They can do that. Left-wing parties in Europe have done that, such as the Danish Social Democrats. You can just do it. But they won't here. Because that's too core of a policy to them. They could just walk back from the carbon tax, but they won't. It's too core of a policy. They've baked in too much to it. So no matter what happens, who leads the Liberal Party at the end of the summer, if Trudeau does get couped, it won't change the Liberal fortune unless the person coming in, replacing Trudeau, is qualitatively different. And I don't mean like superficial things like he's a different race, or it's a girl now, or they're younger, or they're older. Not superficial crap like that. Not blue liberal versus social liberal. Not that crap like that either. I mean someone who's qualitatively different, who does a completely different approach to politics, who might even not even be describable as a liberal. In much the same way that Keir Starmer and Jeremy Corbyn are barely the same thing. The fact they're both in Liberal parties, or sorry, the Labour Party is wild, because they completely act differently. Jeremy Corbyn is your neo-socialist type who wants socialist policies but doesn't like borders or nationalism or anything approaching coherency. He's an internationalist socialist, I guess you could call that. Whereas Starmer is more of a normal socialist, if you will. A moderate. Maybe you sock dem. You call him like a normal sock dem. Sometimes he touches a little left conservatism there, but he's a pretty normie sock dem normally. Whereas Jeremy Corbyn was a internationalist socialist. And he describes himself as that. That's not even me trying to call him a name or a slur. Social's not really a slur, but you get my point. He described himself as that. Replacing that with Corbyn with Starmer was a qualitative, massive change in the Labour Party. But I don't see Liberals doing that. I think they're going to replace Trudeau with one of his cabinet ministers, and it's going to be the same thing. Or maybe they'll replace him with Mark Carney, who is not currently in Liberal cabinet, but is basically the same kind of guy. Unless suddenly Mark Carney, as Liberal leader, decides to do a bunch of things differently. But the way he's acted as a private citizen does not inspire me to believe that he would be meaningfully different as the Liberal leader. He'd probably just act the same way. I could be wrong. I'd be happy to be wrong, but that's my expectation for him. So what does this all mean? Well, I think at this stage, the Liberals might as well just call an election right now. The only advantage for holding on for another calendar year is their own personal power. Maybe they have some policies they want to cram through in the last year. Maybe. But if you're looking at the health of the political party, calling an election now is actually better than waiting. The UK Tories had that exact problem. They waited. And the longer you wait when you're the sick man, the more likely that some entrepreneurial individual is going to come up and take you out. And that's Nigel Farage's Reform Party. Will that fully displace the Tories this election? I don't know. But it's pretty clear at this stage that the Tories are going to leave the 2024 election in the UK drastically weaker than they would have if they just called it last year when Boris Johnson resigned. But of course, they couldn't do that. Of course. They stick on to the last bitter moment. With another leader in charge who is basically the same as the last one, doing essentially the same thing as the last one, blissfully ignorant of why voters don't like them. Does that sound familiar? And with that, I bid you all adieu, and I will see you on July 29th with another video.